palace of marble gleamed beneath the morning sun, its corridors silent except for the echo of sandals gliding across polished stone. Servants lowered their eyes as a veiled woman passed. Her hands were covered in silk gloves. Her perfume faint, yet deliberate, a scent designed to inspire reverence, not desire. To the empire, she was divinity wrapped in flesh, the Empress, the mother of Rome's virtue, the woman who symbolized the purity of power. But what the empire worshipped by day, it feared by night. Beneath the gold and incense, another life stirred, one that began where piety ended. When darkness fell, the veil came off. The same woman who knelt before altars now slipped through hidden doors into the city's veins, trading her crown for anonymity. Imagine following her shadow through the twisting streets of the Suburra, Rome's pleasure district. The air is thick with smoke and laughter, the scent of wine and sweat clinging to every stone. Oil lamps flicker in windows where sin is sold like art. And there, in the chaos, a senator walks his cloak drawn close, his heart pounding. He's not searching for pleasure. He's following a rumor. He pushes open a brothel door. Inside, bodies move in rhythm with the dim red light. His gaze drifts, unsure, until it freezes. Among the painted faces and cheap perfume, one figure moves differently, deliberate, composed, almost regal. A whisper of recognition slices through the noise. He stares harder, his breath gone. The veil slips just enough to reveal her face. Pale skin, golden hair, the same face stamped on the empire's coins. The Empress of Rome stands before him not as a goddess, but as a prostitute. In that moment, every sermon, every law, every illusion of Roman morality shatters. The woman who ruled from marble halls has descended into the dirt, not as victim, but as willing participant in her own undoing. The night swallows her laughter. The city keeps her secret, because in Rome, even virtue had a mask, and Messalina had learned how to wear both. The city of Rome woke each day beneath the watchful eyes of its own laws. Every stone pillar bore the weight of virtue, every archway echoed with the promise of purity. The senators spoke of discipline, the priests preached chastity, the poets sang of sacred love. Yet behind these words, the empire throbbed with hunger. Morality was not truth, it was performance, and every Roman knew it. The empire demanded purity in public, but fed on corruption in private. Statues of gods stood tall above the streets, while courtesans whispered to generals in shadowed alleys. The laws were written by men who dined with philosophers and slept with slaves. Virtue was currency traded in temples and courts used to build reputations and destroy enemies. At the center of this grand illusion sat Emperor Claudius. He was old, cautious and weak. His limp made him appear harmless, but his ambition was heavy with fear. He ruled through paper decrees and borrowed loyalty. To prove his worth, he clung to the image of moral perfection, and nothing proved morality better than the woman beside him, his wife Messalina. She was young and radiant, her presence like the promise of spring after war. To the empire, she was the emblem of fertility, the mother of heirs, the perfect Roman wife. Every ceremony displayed her grace, every coin carried her image. When Claudius appeared before the Senate, she stood behind him, silent and pure, the living symbol of order. But symbols are prisons. Messalina's beauty was not her freedom, it was her chain. She played her role with flawless obedience, smiling in temples, bowing before idols, touching the hands of citizens who worshipped her as if touching virtue itself. Yet behind her calm eyes something stirred, something that had nothing to do with love or duty. Imagine her standing beside the emperor during a public feast, the sound of flutes filling the air, the scent of roasted meat heavy on every breath. She watches senators boast of morality while their eyes slide toward the dancing girls. She watches her husband raise his cup to virtue while his slaves refill it with imported sin. In that moment, she understands what Rome truly worships. Not purity, not honor, not the gods. It worships control, and she learns the first lesson of power, that those who pretend to be righteous are the easiest to destroy. As the feast ends, the torches fade and the city falls into silence. The empire sleeps under the illusion of its own virtue. But within the palace walls, Messalina does not sleep. The mask of morality has become too tight to bear, and the night outside calls her by name. The moon rose above the rooftops of Rome, pale and heavy, as if burdened by the sins it had seen. The streets below were alive with noise, laughter, drums, and the wild joy of Saturnalia. Slaves dressed as masters, as fools, rules forgotten under the spell of festival. Somewhere within that chaos, a woman moved barefoot, her cloak drawn close, her face hidden beneath a hood. The marble empress had become a shadow among her own people. No guards, no attendants, no crown, just the sound of her breathing and the rhythm of her heart. Every step she took away from the palace was a step toward herself. The alleys twisted around her like veins leading to the heart of the city. Lamps flickered on doorways marked with red paint, the sign of places where pleasure and ruin shared the same bed. The scent of wine clung to the air. A girl laughed, a man shouted, coins clattered on stone. Inside one of those dim rooms, Messalina stood watching. Women leaned against the walls waiting for customers, men bargained over prices as if trading livestock. She was supposed to feel disgust. Instead, she felt envy. These women had no crowns, no courts, no duties, yet their power was immediate, undeniable. Men begged for them. Men paid for them. She realized that here on the edges of the empire, a woman's body could command more loyalty than a throne. Her first night was hesitation and fear. Her second was curiosity. Her third became something darker. She began to study the trade, its gestures, its rhythms, its control. The way a touch could command silence, the way a glance could bend a man's will. Power was not in marble halls. It was in the quiet between breath and surrender. On the final night of Saturnalia, she entered a brothel wearing the clothes of a servant. No one recognized her. The keeper nodded her toward a small room lit by oil lamps. She smiled for the first time without pretense. As the night unfolded, she forgot the weight of titles and the sound of her name. By dawn, her skin was marked with dust and sweat, her hair tangled and her eyes alight with something that felt like revelation. When the sun rose, she walked home alone through empty streets. The city was waking from its dream. Messalina was not. She had seen herself reflected in the faces of strangers and found something intoxicating. Inside the palace, her attendants gasped at her appearance. The empress smiled faintly and said she had been praying. They believed her because they wanted to. Rome always believed its own illusions. That morning, as Claudius sat in judgment over the sins of others, the woman beside him listened without a word. She had discovered a new kind of power, one born not from purity, but from its opposite. The Empress of Rome had fallen into the night and returned stronger than before. The sun poured through the palace windows like molten gold, washing over the marble floor, where servants knelt in silence. Messalina sat at the center, draped in white, her face serene, her voice calm, her smile measured. But inside her the same fever still burned. The nights in the Subura had not satisfied her. They had awakened her. Power now tasted of flesh and fear, and she wanted more. Whispers had begun to move through Rome, stories of an unknown courtesan whose endurance left even the city's most infamous women trembling. Some said she was blessed by Venus, others said she was cursed. Only Messalina knew the truth. It was not lust that drove her, it was conquest. She summoned a nobleman under the pretense of charity. As he knelt to kiss her hand, she asked if he believed virtue could be measured. The man hesitated. She smiled. Then let me show you how Rome measures mine. That night, she ordered her servants to prepare a private chamber hung with silk and gold, where torches burned like sacrificial fires. The nobleman left the palace at dawn unable to speak. His silence became rumor. His rumor became legend. Soon Messalina's secret life became an unspoken obsession among the elite. Senators and courtiers whispered of her daring. Poets compared her beauty to goddesses, but none dared write her name. The empress began to control the very thing that once controlled her. Reputation. Shame. She turned it into a weapon sharper than any blade. When she heard of Scylla, the courtesan famed for her skill and grace, she laughed. Let Rome see what divinity looks like without its veil. The challenge was set. A contest to determine who could endure the longest through a single night. Nobles came disguised in masks. Musicians played softly, as if accompanying a funeral. The atmosphere trembled between awe and horror. The contest began with laughter and wine. By midnight, the laughter had died. Even the torches seemed to burn lower as Messalina moved with relentless calm, refusing rest, refusing defeat. Scylla collapsed long before dawn, gasping her surrender. Messalina did not stop. The room fell silent, the witnesses too stunned to speak. When at last she rose, her skin shone with sweat and triumph. No one dared meet her eyes. She looked around at the trembling men and women who had come to watch her fall and found only fear reflected back. It was then she understood the full depth of her power. Rome would never worship her as a saint, but it would remember her as something greater, a force that no law could restrain and no god could claim. At dawn, she stood by the balcony overlooking the waking city, her hands resting on cold stone, her lips curved in a faint smile. The sky bled red over the rooftops like an omen. The Empress had become the queen of vice. The palace became her web, and Rome her prey. By day, Messalina appeared every bit the dutiful wife, her hand resting gently on Claudius's arm, her eyes lowered in perfect submission. By night she built an empire no man could see, yet every man would eventually fear. What began as curiosity had evolved into something deliberate, calculated, almost scientific. She had learned that desire could be bought, but true power came when it could be used. Behind a villa near the campus, Martius, a new kind of establishment, opened its doors. To the public, it was a private society for Rome's elite, a place where senators discussed politics over wine and noble women performed rituals of devotion. In truth, it was Messalina's creation, a brothel disguised as a sanctuary of refinement. The women who served there were not slaves. They were daughters of senators, wives of generals, coerced with threats whispered behind silk curtains. Their beauty was their prison, and their shame her weapon. Messalina used her influence to recruit them, promising protection from scandal, while secretly ensuring their ruin if they refused. She knew the hunger of powerful men, and she knew how easily that hunger could destroy them. Every encounter, every whispered confession was recorded by her servants. Scrolls were filled with secrets, blackmail waiting to be unleashed. Her bedchambers became a parliament of lust where politics and sin met in silence. Senators left the villa with trembling hands, unable to meet her gaze during public ceremonies. Commanders swore loyalty not to the emperor, but to his wife. Messalina did not need armies. She commanded Rome with secrets. The most dangerous truths in the empire were no longer guarded by soldiers, but by her smile. Imagine the tension. In those nights, the sound of footsteps echoing. Down marble corridors, the flicker of torchlight over parchment ink still wet with betrayal. Messalina would sit alone after each encounter, her fingers tracing the rim of a goblet, her mind sharpening each confession into a blade. She was not just Rome's empress now, she was its silent intelligence chief, its collector of weakness, its queen of manipulation, her. Spies moved like ghosts through the city, carrying messages written in perfume and folded into ribbons. Names, dates, confessions. The empire that prided itself on law was now ruled by desire turned into information. Men who once judged her now begged her mercy. She began to see the faces of those who opposed her in the Senate and smile, knowing their secrets were already hers. Each victory fed her hunger for control until she no longer distinguished between governance and seduction, between politics and sin. The brothel was her throne room, the whispers of guilty men her anthem. In the heart of the empire, a new power had risen, one that did not wear armor or raise banners. It wore silk, it spoke softly, and it conquered without drawing blood. Rome no longer slept. It pulsed through the night with music and incense, the city trembling beneath the weight of its own pleasures. The empress no longer hid her empire of sin, she now dressed it in the garments of faith. Temples once built for worship became the stage for her new religion. She called it ceremony, but it was nothing less than a revelation of depravity. The invitations came written in gold, sealed with the imperial crest. Senators, their wives, generals and priests, all summoned in the name of divine celebration. No one could refuse. The villa was lit like an altar, the air thick with myrrh and sweat. Marble statues of gods watched as the guests entered, each uncertain but fascinated. A priest blessed the hall. Candles burned. A harp played softly. Then Messalina appeared, draped in crimson silk. Her skin glistening in the torchlight, she moved through the crowd like a living deity. Her voice calm, her eyes shining with that same terrible serenity that could only come from belief. She declared that Rome had become weak under false modesty. That desire was not sin, but the true proof of devotion. The guests laughed uneasily, but the guards sealed the doors. What began as ceremony descended into madness. The guests were ordered to remove their masks, to shed their dignity, to become part of what she called the Holy Union. Music rose, bodies swayed, fear dissolved into intoxication. The rituals of prayer turned into acts of submission. Imagine standing among them, your breath caught between awe and horror, the smell of wine and burning oil heavy in the lungs, the sound of silk sliding against skin. Faces once carved in pride, now trembling in shame. Messalina stood above them, arms open, whispering prayers twisted into commands. In my temple, sin is the new sacrament. She moved through the chaos like a conductor shaping the rhythm of ruin. Senators who had condemned adultery now knelt before her. Their wives, once paragons of chastity, followed in tears and fevered devotion. It was not lust anymore. It was surrender, and she watched it all with quiet fascination, like a scientist observing an experiment. By the time the sun broke through the villa's windows, the temple of vice lay in silence. Some guests prayed, others hid their faces. All knew that the empress owned them completely. No law, no god, no emperor could erase what had been witnessed. Messalina returned to the palace as if nothing had happened. Her hair pinned her hands clean, her eyes calm. Claudius greeted her at breakfast, unaware that the empire's morality had died in his wife's arms. She smiled at him gently, pouring his wine. He thanked her for being the light of Rome. She replied softly that she only served the gods. But that morning, even the gods must have looked away. The morning air over Rome was still. The city moved in silence as if holding its breath, waiting for the next rumor to be born. Within the palace, Claudius prepared to leave for Ostia to inspect the grain fleets. His departure meant peace for Messalina. No emperor, no eyes upon her, only freedom. She watched him go with a smile that did not reach her eyes. The moment the gates closed, her world shifted again. Now there was no need for secrecy. The empress, who had once disguised herself as a servant, no longer cared to hide. The queen of Rome's sins was ready to crown herself. Her obsession had reached the point where desire and power had become the same hunger. She had conquered men through lust. Now she would conquer the empire through delusion. A young senator named Gaius Silius had caught her attention. Handsome, educated, ambitious, everything her husband was not. She summoned him first as a guest, then as a confidant, then as something closer. Soon, he lived in her shadow, obeying her every whim, believing he was favored by fortune. Messalina began to speak to him of destiny. She told him the gods whispered of a union that would restore Rome to glory. He laughed, thinking it flattery. Then she ordered a wedding. It was no hidden affair. The invitations were sent. The musicians summoned the temple, decorated with garlands and silver. Citizens gathered outside, believing it another imperial festival. Inside, the high priest hesitated, trembling, as he looked at the empress standing before him beside a man who was not her husband. She nodded once and he performed the rite. Rings were exchanged, vows spoken, the marriage sealed by the same rituals used for emperors. When it ended, the crowd erupted in drunken celebration. Wine poured through the streets, tables, overturned slaves danced in madness. Messalina declared that the gods had chosen her anew. Her voice echoed through the marble halls filled with laughter that bordered on hysteria. She ordered coins struck bearing her image alongside Silius's, as if Rome had a new emperor. Statues began to appear in secret corners of the city, carved in their likeness. Those who witnessed it could not believe what they saw. Some whispered she had gone mad. Others feared she had touched something divine. Her ambition had detached from reality itself. The empire trembled not from armies, but from one woman's delusion that she could reshape fate with her own hands. Claudius's advisors learned of the wedding from a terrified servant. They brought the news to the emperor, who stared at them in disbelief. His lips parted, but no words came. Even in a world of corruption and cruelty, what Messalina had done was unthinkable. A living empress marrying another man while the emperor still breathed was not scandal. It was treason. The city waited for retribution. Inside her villa, Messalina celebrated until dawn, her hair unbound, her hands stained with wine, her laughter echoing through corridors that had once known prayer. She believed she was untouchable. She believed the empire itself would bend to her will. But in Rome, nothing untouchable lasts for long. The sun never truly rose that morning. It crawled weakly over Rome, casting long shadows across the palace gates. Claudius had returned his carriage silent, his guards grim. The whispers had already reached him. The empress had married another man. At first he laughed. Then he demanded proof. When the scroll was unrolled before him, the wedding contract sealed in Messalina's own hand, the laughter stopped. His face turned pale, his trembling fingers tightening around the wax. He said nothing for a long time. Then quietly he asked, "Is she still alive?" By the time the soldiers reached her villa, the celebration was ending. The tables were overturned, wine soaking the marble floors. Flowers from the wedding garlands lay crushed under the boots of frightened guests. Messalina sat in the garden, her gown torn, her hair tangled, her eyes glassy but still burning with defiance. When she saw the soldiers, she tried to smile. "My husband sent you," she said softly, "to bring me home." The captain did not answer. His orders were clear. Claudius would not see her again. The empress was to be erased, not tried, not pitied, not remembered. She was led to a small courtyard near the aqueducts, the same place where traitors met their end. Her friend and accomplice tried to beg for mercy, whispering that the emperor's heart might soften if she confessed. But Messalina did not kneel. She only asked for a moment to compose herself. Her hands shook, yet her voice remained calm. "Tell Claudius," she said, "that his wife died faithful." The executioner hesitated. No one wanted to strike the blow. For a brief second, even the empire itself seemed to hesitate, as if Rome held its breath to see how the goddess of vice would die. Finally, the blade fell. There was no scream, only the sound of steel against flesh, a dull thud, and then silence. At that exact moment, the wind rose through the city, scattering rose petals from the wedding feast across the streets. In the palace, Claudius sat motionless, staring at an empty cup. When the news came, he said nothing, only nodded once and ordered that her name be removed from every inscription. Her statues destroyed, her memory forbidden. The woman who had ruled Rome's desires was now erased by the same hands that once crowned her. The court scribes recorded her end with cold efficiency. Executed by order of the emperor for treason. No mention of love, no mention of madness, just another entry in the empire's endless ledger of silence. That night, the torches outside the palace burned lower than usual. No one spoke her name. No one dared, but in the alleys of Rome, where sin and smoke still lingered, whispers began again, soft, trembling, half in awe, half in fear. Because legends do not die, they only change their shape. The chisels began before dawn. Their sound echoed through the marble halls like the slow heartbeat of revenge. The first statue to fall was in the garden where she once laughed. Stone fingers broke one by one, until the face that had ruled Rome's desire lay in fragments at the feet of the workers. Her name was scraped from every inscription, her portraits burned, her coins melted. Claudius ordered it all. The decree was simple. She had never existed, yet Rome remembered. The city that devoured everything could not digest her. Whispers followed every hammer strike. Some said she had cursed the empire before she died. Others swore her ghost walked the Palatine corridors at night, her veil still dripping with the scent of myrrh. The more they tried to erase her, the stronger her shadow grew. Imagine the dust in the air that morning, the men sweating as they carved through marble eyes that once seemed alive. They worked in silence, not out of duty but fear. To look too long at the face of the condemned was to risk remembering her beauty, and remembering was forbidden. Claudius watched from a balcony, his expression hollow. The empire demanded purification, and he obeyed. Every fragment of her image thrown into the furnace was supposed to restore order. Yet even he felt the emptiness that followed. A city cleansed of its reflection, a man freed of his wife but haunted by her echo. By evening, the temples stood bare, the garden walls clean. The scribes dipped their quills in ink and struck her name from the records. But history has never obeyed orders. The ink faded, the marble cracked. The wind carried her story beyond the empire's borders. Travelers whispered of the empress who turned virtue into a weapon of pleasure, who ruled without crown or army, whose sins could not be buried. They called it damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. Yet what Rome condemned, the centuries preserved. The empire forgot her name, the world remembered her legend. The city was quiet after her name was gone, but silence does not mean peace. It means fear. The people still talked about her in low voices when no guards were near. They said her beauty still walked at night through the palace halls. They said no fire could burn her story away. Years passed, and the empire pretended she had never lived. Yet her face returned in the dreams of those who once served her. The same senators who watched her fall now stared at new empresses with the same fear. They had learned a lesson too late. Power never dies, it only changes shape. The truth is that Rome did not destroy Messalina. It copied her. Every court that came after used her tricks. Every ruler learned from her sins. They learned that control is easier when it hides behind virtue. They learned that desire can rule stronger than law. Look at the world now. The marble has turned to glass, the torches to screens, but the eyes watching are the same. The crowd still gathers to judge, to gossip, to punish. We still trade shame for entertainment and call it justice. We still hide hunger behind words like love and faith. The empires have changed, but the game remains. Every age has its Messalina. She lives in every story where power and pleasure walk together. She is the whisper behind every scandal, the ghost in every throne room, the reminder that virtue without truth always rots from within. When you close your door tonight and the lights fade, remember this. Privacy is the one freedom she never had. Guard it like treasure. Because the moment the world can see you completely, you belong to it. That is the end of her story. Or maybe it is only the beginning told again in another name, another time, another empire.